Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to episode number 31 of the Primetime Rundown Zoom interview series right here on the Eastern Observer and the Blackjack Media Networks. It is Hockey Week this week as we head into Phase 3 of the Return to Play format just next week. So the way it is that we're going to be, it's a perfect segue into the Return to Play as we have a whole bunch of guests on here. And I'm Joey Jarzynka. We cannot thank you enough for joining us here on this Thursday evening. But let's have a warm welcome to Vancouver Canucks play-by-play man on the radio, Sportsnet 650 in Vancouver, Brendan Batchelor. Brendan, how are you and how are things going during your quarantine?
Yeah, I'm good, Joey. Thanks for having me. Doing well, getting excited for the return of hockey and potentially getting back to work here in the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy to think that that we've been out of work for 100+ days. It's and not only out of work, but we're in quarantine, and it's wild to think that it's already July, and it feels like almost that we haven't seen hockey in years as opposed to just a few months. So for you, I'm assuming it's definitely going to be really amazing to get back. But for you as a play-by-play broadcaster, is it a little surreal to or like the euphoria feeling where you have to say we're coming back to a brand new season, if you will, or like a with an asterisk, like the COVID Cup, as we've heard critics say?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be very different. I'm not 100% sure what our broadcast setup is going to look like yet. So whether we're going to be in Edmonton in the arena with no fans calling the games, or whether we're going to be doing it from a studio and calling off monitors. So definitely very different times. It's not going to be what we've been used to in terms of calling the games and traveling with the team. And you think back to March when the season was paused, it feels like a lifetime ago, and yet here we are getting ready potentially for the start of the play-in rounds in a couple of weeks and the Stanley Cup playoffs after that.
Yeah, it's absolutely wild to think that time has flown like that. So let's get things started here. And for those that are wondering what this podcast is all about, it's all about the life of our guests. So every single guest that we've had on here, all 31 thus far, have had ties to the East Coast. Obviously, the Eastern Observer, we wouldn't be getting some West Coast people if they didn't have any East Coast ties. But Brendan Batchelor does. And why? Because he was at Ryerson University for 1 year. So that puts him on the list. And we're really happy that he's joined us here this evening. So let's get things started. So Coquitlam, British Columbia is your home. How did you get into wanting to be a part of the media or becoming a radio broadcaster? Talk about your journey to also, or from actually, Charles Best Secondary School.
Yeah, so I was a diehard hockey fan growing up, Canadian kid, loved playing hockey in the street, loved playing the hockey video games, whatever I could get my hands on. But I was also about the show of the whole thing. So when I was playing street hockey, I was doing the play-by-play. When I was playing the video game, I was doing the play-by-play. When I was watching games, I would often mute them so I could do the play-by-play. So as a young child, I don't know if I knew it at that point, but I was already sort of working towards a career in broadcasting. And so, grew up playing hockey. And then when I was going through high school and trying to decide, what I wanted to do as a career, it was sort of like, well, this is something I've been doing for fun for most of my life. And I had never really thought about it as a career choice until that point. But did some research and thought about it. And initially, after I graduated high school, did go to Ryerson University in Toronto, working towards a journalism degree. But I only stayed there for 1 year, mainly because I'm Vancouver born and raised, and my goal was to work in the media industry and the sports media industry in Vancouver. And the thing I realized very quickly is Ryerson was a 4-year degree program, so it was going to take me 4 years to graduate, whereas I ended up going to BCIT, which was only 2 years, and it's more like a trade school, so it's very applied work. And so by dropping out of Ryerson and going to BCIT, which is back here in Vancouver, I got out of school a year earlier and into the industry a year earlier than I would have. But I also realized that the connections I was making were in Toronto, and my plan had always been to go to school in Toronto and then return home and try to find work here. So all of those things sort of coming together. I was accepted into BCIT, which is a really prestigious broadcast school out here on the West Coast. So I returned home and did my 2 years of BCIT and then got my foot in the door in the industry after that.
Yeah, it's wild to think because just to clarify, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Ryerson up in Toronto is almost like the Syracuse of the Fordham of Canada. So that's actually a bold decision that you made there, especially where you got your foot in the door at Ryerson and then you still moved back west.
Yeah, it is probably the most distinguished journalism degree program in Canada. But that said, another reason that I made the choice to leave and return to BCIT is I thought about the people in the industry who had the jobs that I wanted. John Shorthouse at the time was the radio play-by-play voice of the Canucks. He now does games on TV. He went to BCIT. Dan Murphy covers the Canucks for Sportsnet TV here in Vancouver. He went to BCIT. And, specifically in British Columbia and in Vancouver, if you talk to anyone in broadcasting, there's better than a 50% chance that they went to BCIT. So I looked at that and said, the people that have the jobs I want went to this school. And so even though Ryerson is very prestigious, and even though I'm sure I would have got a great education had I continued there and been able to find good work in the media landscape, whether it was a print journalist or a broadcaster or whatever it might have been, that was the choice I made at the time, and it seems to have worked out to this point.
Yeah, I was going to say, you returned to your roots and it really paid off for you. That's really unbelievable, unbelievable stuff because, and we've heard it a lot where if you don't, there's the stereotype of if you don't go to said school, you're not going to make it in the industry, but you followed your heart and where your do we call them idols, if you will, in
the people I looked up to in the industry, right, for sure, right, had all gone to BCIT.
Yeah, exactly. So with all them going there, you followed your heart to come back home. Really good stuff. And eventually 2010, following your time at BCIT, British Columbia Institute of Technology in Long, 2010, you were a liaison officer. So just to let you know, and I'm assuming you saw it, but I took a peek at your whole LinkedIn page and there's a lot there. So, we'll go through, some of the most notable stuff, if you will. But to get your foot in the industry, Olympic Broadcasting Services, in Vancouver, of course, talk about what that role entailed for you. And how that became something to eventually get you back to your hometown.
Yeah, so that actually was a job that I was able to work through BCIT. So, of course, the Winter Olympics were in Vancouver in 2010. And, I was in my graduating year of BCIT while the Olympics were happening. So, Olympic Broadcast Services was looking for local aspiring broadcasters to be involved in helping a lot of the broadcast side of the games come off. And so our instructors at BCIT said, you know what, for the Olympics, you can go and work. We're going to cancel classes. We're not going to have school. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So as a liaison officer, I was actually assigned to work in Canada Hockey Place, as it was called during the Olympics. It's Rogers Arena or GM Place or the other names it's been known by. It's the rink where the Canucks play.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as a liaison officer, we worked a lot behind the scenes, making sure that things that the media that were there covering the Olympics were able to run smoothly. So, we would work in the broadcast area and provide game notes for the broadcasters from all the countries around the world, or try and help them if they had technical issues or anything like that. Or we would work, and this is where I worked most of the time during the Olympics, in the mixed zone, which for media availability, generally for NHL teams, you go into the dressing room, everybody crowds around a player, you do a scrum, and you get interviews that way. But the Olympics, they set it up very differently, where there's kind of like a lane that the players walk down, and there's a bunch of gates, and on the other side of that gates, all the media representatives, one by one by one, are lined up. And if you're a prominent rights holding member for the Olympics like NBC, you're right at the front of the line. If you're a smaller broadcaster from a smaller country, you're at the back of the line. And the players come through, and they are not obligated to stop. But our job was to sort of let the players know, hey, Sidney Crosby, someone from TSN in Canada wants to interview you. And then they could be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll stop for that. Or no, I'm good. I don't want to do interviews today. So it was
Wow.
essentially, we would go before the players came off the ice, whether it was after their practice or after their game, they would come off the ice and go right into this mix zone. So before they came off the ice, our job was to go to all the media members, find out what players they wanted to speak to, and then try and help them get those players to stop with them. So, I mean, this is an once in a lifetime experience. Like I'm down there talking to Sidney Crosby, being like, hey, do you want to come over here? And all the players on all the teams through the Olympic tournament. So obviously that was really cool, sort of eye-opening moment for me to be right down, where the players are. And then it also ended up as a Canadian hockey fan. A lot of your American viewers won't be happy to hear this, but I was standing right behind the net when Sidney Crosby scored the golden goal. So that's sort of a once in a lifetime moment to be there. And, it was a great first experience at what it was like to be in the atmosphere of media at a big event like that. And, it certainly helped me going forward.
Yeah, and I was gonna say I actually took a peek at your Instagram, and I saw that where your face is. that was great. Probably one of the best pictures I've seen and reactions I've seen from a sporting event, and especially the Olympics. Now, what is it like for you, and especially someone who's just out of college, to or as you were still in college, or just towards the latter part of your tenure at BCIT and covering an Olympic event? Talk about how like a once in a lifetime moment this is for you.
Yeah, it's certainly it's still one of my greatest memories in working in media and sports in general, and it was one of my very first jobs in broadcasting and media too. So to be around there, and again, you're rubbing shoulders with all these top players. Wayne Gretzky comes by. Brian Burke is there at the time, former general manager of the Canucks at that point, and was really well known in the Vancouver market. And Jaromir Jagr was there. He had been out of the NHL for a few years at that point, and so it was really, yeah, you're right. It was a once in a lifetime experience, but also it was really informative for me because you're not really working in media. You're working more. It's almost like a media relations job, really. But you're there every day, seeing how media members from around the world conduct themselves, the kind of things they're doing to build stories, or the questions they're asking in interviews, and things like that. So not only was it a once in a lifetime experience because you're there watching the Olympics from ice level, but I also learned a lot in terms of seeing the routine and how things work at that level for media members.
Right. And also at the time, I'm assuming the best part about it, also to our young aspiring American viewers here, you're almost like a sponge because you're absorbing every little bit of information. And we'll get to that question actually later on, during this whole coronavirus, everything going on, and how to move forward with the said careers. But so at the time, then right after that, or just before that, you were 2009 to 12. You went back to your hometown, Coquitlam, and you worked for the Express as a public address announcer. That is a British Columbia Hockey League BCHL squad. And thank you, Google, for that one. And that was your real first sports gig in the real world. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I had actually worked for that team, the Express, as a stick boy when I was like 12. So filling the water bottles and helping around the dressing room wherever I could. So I still knew a few people in the organization. And while I was in school, because I started in 2009, so I was still in school, I got word that they needed a public address announcer. It was on a volunteer basis, so I wasn't being paid or anything, but it was, I was just excited to be at the games, be the PA announcer, get experience. So I took that opportunity and continued to do that for a number of seasons while I was still sort of getting my footing in the broadcast industry. And I'm sure we'll talk about it in a moment, but there was a point in my broadcasting life where I was doing like 3 or 4 different jobs at once because you're trying to gain experience, you're trying to get whatever opportunities you can. So, I was doing the public address announcing for the hockey team. I was working at a radio station. We already talked about, Olympic broadcast services and the opportunity I had there through the Olympics. So, that was one area where I was able to get my foot in the door. And again, not necessarily being paid, but getting experience. And that's sort of how I looked at things at that time. And that's how I would encourage young broadcasters to look at things too, is as much as money is important and you need to eat and you need to survive, you know, there are opportunities that you can get by just being willing to do the work and, you know, wanting to show up and help out and learn as much as you can. So that was the opportunity I had there. It was a great opportunity. You know, I got to follow that team for a number of seasons, and so it was a great first step into the industry, I guess you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back obviously to your time with Olympic Broadcasting Services and seeing what you're able to do in the Olympic scene, and then to see what you're able to do with Coquitlam, and then following that you were also with Surrey Eagles Hockey Club 2012 to 13. We'll get to that in just a second. But to be versatile in the industry, how good is that, especially with you know, not a lot of money, obviously, in the industry. We all know that is how it is, unless you make it really big where you are now. But you know, to start off, you're trying to, you know, get pennies left and right, but you're also trying to gain as much experience as possible for little to no money. Moving forward there, how difficult was it at Surrey Eagles Hockey Club? Was it to be the director of media relations and the play-by-play broadcaster?
So in that role, it wasn't too complex, to be honest, because both of those roles were part-time roles. So for the play-by-play, I showed up, I called the games, I was paid a rate per game. And then that media relations job was not a full-time office job. Okay. It was just essentially, if an article needed to be written for the website, I would write it. Or if a press release had to be written because the club was making a trade, I would write it. So, you know, I was doing the media relations of the play-by-play for the Surrey Eagles, who were in the same league as the Coquitlam Express, actually, but, you know, just in a neighboring city. So that was my first opportunity to call play-by-play, which had always been my goal. So I jumped at that chance. And then I was also working at Team Radio. It was called at the time TSN Radio. And that was started as part-time production work and evolved into, you know, being on air, doing like twice hourly sports updates and doing a little bit of reporting for some of the local sports teams as well. So you're right that versatility was important for me early on. And I would say, I would encourage young broadcasters that, you know, it is very important. You know, I'm now at a point where, yes, I'm doing play-by-play in the National Hockey League, but I can host a talk show. I could produce the talk show if I had to. Like, I have all these skills, you know, whether it's podcasting or whatever it is. I've got experience with all these things. And in a media industry that is volatile at the best of times, and we're certainly not in the best of times right now with COVID-19, being as valuable as possible to your employer is something that's important. So, you know, for the last couple of months, just as an example, there hasn't been any hockey while I've been hosting a show for an hour a day on our radio station. So that's something where, you know, you make yourself valuable to your employers, and if layoffs come, or when they come, because that's the way this industry works a lot of the time, you might, you know, retain your job just because they look at you and say, he's someone or she's someone that can do this and that and also this, and you provide more value that way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it really is the truth, especially, you know, as you said, during this COVID-19 time, and just to see that, you know, now jobs and a lot of the companies and businesses here, regardless of whatever industry it may be, and especially in the sports industry, with nothing being played now, it's more on the lines of reducing as opposed to adding. So especially with the with as much experience as possible, the better off you have to retain your job. That's for sure. So now, as we said, and I think this should be the title of the show is versatile, because you then went on to become the play-by-play broadcaster for the then Vancouver Whitecaps too. They were formerly part of the USL Championship team for the Vancouver Whitecaps, MLS team, of course. And they're no longer in business. They're a part of the Fresno FC merger in California now. But you're calling soccer now, so this is a little something different. Talk about your time calling a completely different sport when you're a Canadian and a hockey boy.
Yeah, well, I've grown up as a soccer fan as well and had played it a little bit growing up. And that was just an opportunity at the time. I didn't do it for very long. It was only their home games that I broadcasted, so I didn't travel with them on the road or anything like that. The USL at the time just required the home team to provide a broadcast so it could be streamed online and people could
Yeah.
watch it. And so, I was approached for that opportunity. I thought, why not? This would be something a little bit different, a little bit fun. Obviously it was another one of those multiple gigs that I talked about where I'm working as a hockey play-by-play announcer. I'm working at a local radio station and I'm doing these soccer games on the side as well. So, it was actually something I was pretty nervous about going into the first game just because, it's such a different sport. And, I know a lot of people, particularly in the United States, think hockey is a very hard game to broadcast when you compare it to the other sports. But I actually see it the opposite way. And maybe it's because I grew up with hockey. But the reason is that as a play-by-play broadcaster, your job is to describe things. And in hockey, something is always happening. So you always have something to describe. Whereas soccer is a much slower game. Sometimes the plays take a long time to develop, and yet you're still on the air, you're still broadcasting. You've got to find a way to be entertaining and, for lack of a better term, to fill that time. And baseball is very similar that way as
Oh yeah.
well. So it was definitely a change of pace for me to broadcast soccer. But, again, it was something that was a good opportunity that I was able to use. And I grew that out actually to the point where I actually called a few MLS games for TSN radio at the time because I was working for them and the regular play-by-play announcer was not able to broadcast games. So I did go on and call, I think it was 3 games in Major League Soccer too. So, just again, versatile, right? At this point in my career, I was aspiring to be a play-by-play broadcaster, but really I was aspiring to have full-time salaried employment in broadcasting. And so you never know whether that's going to come, whether you're going to be offered to be the host of a talk show, whether you're going to be a soccer play-by-play guy, if that's something that, you can grow and develop, or whether ultimately I could achieve my dream of calling play-by-play in the NHL. So that's how I saw it, is it's another opportunity, another chance to grow, and certainly another opportunity to make a bit of money on the side as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. That's really, really fascinating stuff, especially as we said, going from hockey to soccer. And something that I find truly remarkable too is that you were saying that hockey for you is a little, as you were saying about the, with us down here. And I know for me, for sure, I know with soccer, obviously, especially on TV, less is more because, the picture describes it all. And especially with you now on radio, we'll get to, we're going a little out of order here, but that's okay. I do want to get to this because we're on that topic. But because you're on the radio now, and especially with hockey, because, again, everything is happening so quickly. And the way you hear, like down here in the States, you hear on NBC with Doc Emmerich calling a game, but it almost sounds like he's calling it on radio because he's describing so much, but he can because of his amazing vocabulary. But, with hockey and for you on the radio, how difficult is that? Or I guess different, if you will, because you literally have to paint the picture on the radio.
Yeah, it's you don't economize words as much as you would on TV. So, you know, an example I always use to describe to people how different broadcasting games on the radio is I don't know, if you're broadcasting a New York Ranger game and you're saying, oh, here's Panarin shoots and scores. Well, you're seeing it on TV, so where he is on the ice, the kind of shot that he took, where he beat the goaltender. All of those little intricacies are not you don't have to describe them because you can see them. Whereas on radio, I might have to say, here's Panarin, top of the right circle, wrist shot, scores, fired it over the glove of the goaltender inside the near post. And now you haven't seen this play, but if you're visualizing it, you can then go, okay, I have a picture of what that is like in my mind. So because of that, you have to speak a lot more and you have to speak very quickly because hockey is a very fast game. So it's something that I've grown and developed throughout my hockey play-by-play career. All of my hockey play-by-play almost exclusively has been radio based. So that's the way I've called games. And if I get a chance to call games on TV one day regularly as part of my job rather than a one-off here or there like I've done in the past, then, that's something that my call might change a little bit, might be a little bit less descriptive. But you're right. You bring up a guy like Mike Emmerich, who does speak a lot and does provide a lot of that context because, from talking to other broadcasters, hockey fans like to have that sort of context and background and explanation. And so even though it's television, there are a lot of fans out there that still like a radio type of call.
Yes.
And that's what you see from a guy like Mike Emmerich.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, following your time in USL Championship and the MLS, we then moved to the Vancouver Giants in the Western Hockey League in the WHL. But during your time all the way back to 2008, or when you came home, you were with TSN 1040 and 1410 AM radio in Vancouver as an announcer, reporter, and a producer. So as you were saying, you're doing a gazillion jobs. And you're also the play-by-play and director of media relations. So now here we're in the WHL. So I'll ask you this question again: to have both titles as play-by-play and director of media relations, was it a little more work, if you will, or was the workload more because now you're in the WHL? This is not, I'm not going to undermine the BCHL, but WHL, it's a little higher in the rankings.
Yeah, the WHL is part of the Canadian Hockey League. It's the Western branch of the Canadian Hockey League, which is the highest level of junior hockey in Canada. So it's much more of a show. It's much more of a product. Games are televised up here. It's covered, not at the same level as the National Hockey League, but, people pay a lot of attention to the WHL because some of the top prospects in the NHL draft every year come out of that league. So, yeah, it was a step up. And for the first season, I just did the play-by-play. So that, again, was very similar to what I was doing with the Surrey Eagles, where I was, just coming in, broadcasting the game and leaving. And that was my role. But at the same time, as we've alluded to, I was working at the radio station, doing production work, doing announcing work, doing reporting work. So again, having, your hands in various different pots to try and, A, make a living at it, and then B, also, get as much experience and grow as a broadcaster as much as you can. And then it was after that first season, the club offered me to come on full time as the director of media relations as well. And yeah, it was a lot of work. I won't lie. Game days, I was a full-time office employee on top of doing the play-by-play broadcast, doing all my prep for the play-by-play broadcast, traveling with the team all over Western Canada and into the United States. Out here on the West Coast, the league goes as far south as Portland, Oregon, with the Portland Winterhawks, and then it covers all of Western Canada, really. So from Vancouver, right here on the West Coast, into the prairies as far east as Brandon, Manitoba, and now Winnipeg. So a lot of long bus rides and a lot of work being done on the bus in the middle of the night and things like that. It was a full-time office job in the sense that I was running the website, the social media, writing articles, dealing with interview requests for players, all of these sorts of things on top of being the play-by-play announcer. And when I was hired for that job, one of my bosses of the hockey team really put it in a good light for me when he described what the job was going to be like. He said, you know what, the media relations job, that's the meat and potatoes of the job. That's, you're helping us grow the reach of our team. You're working with media members. You're running our social media, our outreach to our fans, all of these things. And then the gravy on top is you get to do the play-by-play announcing as well. But yeah, I learned the value of hard work for sure working there, because I would work long days. Like on a game day, you'd come in at 9 or 10 in the morning to get everything set up, and you're leaving at 11 or 12 at night after the end of the game, having done the broadcast and preparing all the media notes and all of these things. So it was a valuable 4 years that I spent with the Vancouver Giants, because I learned a lot of things that I wouldn't have just from doing both of those roles at the same time, and then certainly the value of hard work and being prepared and all of those things as well.
Yeah, and also obviously hard work does pay off. We'll get to that in just a second. But now, still with the Vancouver Giants, though, you said that obviously the meat and potatoes of the job was the director of media relations part. Now, and when we were exchanging messages a few days ago, a part of the prep that I had to not only highlight but also italicize too is that how difficult is it to do all of that, and then especially because your true what you want to do your end goal is to become a play-by-play man. So you want to do obviously everything right, but then you also want to put out a perfect product. How difficult is that to do all of that and put out a perfect product? I don't know how say on TV or on radio, however you guys did it in the WHL.
Yeah, so our games were broadcasted on the radio, and they were actually broadcasted on TSN radio, which was the radio station I worked for. So that was part of how I got that job, because I'd already been working at the radio station. They were the rights holder for the hockey team, and things sort of came together pretty easily there. But yeah, it was a challenge. Like, I'll be honest, I spend way more time on prep now than I did then, because I have the time, because my sole job is to be the play-by-play announcer. So, I learned pretty early on, like, what prep was essential and what prep, would be nice to have, but not necessary. So that, if you have a really busy day in the office and, you're dealing with all sorts of other issues, and then you get to game time and you go, I didn't have as much time to prep as I would have liked. You have a base level of prep that that this is the critical information I need to get through a broadcast. So was I the most prepared every night doing that job? No, I definitely wasn't. There were days where the entire day leading up to the game was hectic, and I was just catching my breath and sitting down in the booth and going, okay, what's happening here? Now there's a game. But that's also something that I think was valuable for me too, because there will be times, even in the NHL, where things change at the drop of a hat, and maybe a bunch of your preparation goes out the door, right? So I can think of an example this year where the Canucks were in Minnesota to face the Minnesota Wild, and about 5 minutes before the game started, we found out that Elias Pettersson, one of the top players on the Canucks, was going to be a surprise scratch because of an undisclosed injury that he had at that point. And so all of a sudden, we've been building, our storylines for the game and our talking points around various things, assuming that Elias Pettersson is going to be playing. And then 5 minutes before the game, you find out that no, all of those storylines are irrelevant, because the storyline now is he's not playing. How can the team do? So, that's something where being able to, tap dance probably isn't the correct word, but being able to adapt on the fly and still put off a good broadcast and a professional broadcast and sound like, that didn't take you by surprise, and sound educated and informed about all those things. A lot of that stuff goes back to those experiences with the Vancouver Giants, where there were times where, I most times I was not as prepped as I would like, but a lot of broadcasters will tell you that they're perfectionists, and like I'll spend 4 or 5 hours a game prepping, and I would still like to prep more than that, because you always feel like there's something you're missing going into a game, and you could probably prep forever and ever and ever. So you kind of have to learn your limits and learn, again, what information is important and what's not. But I think that was a skill as well, being able to carry off a good professional broadcast that to the average listener sounded good, and they wouldn't have known any of the wiser that maybe I didn't have as much time to prep as I would have liked.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I've learned also is that, and I think you can attest to this, is that if you finish all of your notes during a play-by-play broadcast, that means that you're underprepared. I've heard that before. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, no. Like, I would say right now, and again, I said, 4 or 5 hours per game would be the most I would do. And that's normally early in the season, because you're building out a lot of your information, especially when it comes to the opponent. But then, so, the first time the Canucks play the Vegas Golden Knights, I'm doing a lot more prep, because I'm, doing research about, did this player do something in the off season to improve his game or things like that. But the second time the Canucks play the Golden Knights, a lot of that information is built out, and you're just updating it with, this guy scored 3 goals in the last 4 games or whatever it might be. So earlier in the season, I spend a lot more time doing prep. Later in the season, it's a lot less, but it's usually between 2 to 5 hours per game. And I would say, and this, is probably pretty accurate, I'm probably not hyperbolizing very much, 95% of my prep never makes it to the air. But it's information that you have to have in case. So, for example, I track career penalty shot record, career shootout record, career hat tricks. Those are 3 stats that I never use almost every game. Most games, there's not a penalty shot. Most games, it doesn't go to the shootout. And most games, a guy doesn't score a hat trick. But what if this is the game where a guy does? right? What if the Canucks' sixth defenseman, who is a healthy scratch every other game, scores his first career hat trick tonight? If I don't know it's his first career hat trick, then I can't provide the proper context to that moment. So that's how I would describe the prep, is that most of it is preparing for potential situations that likely will never happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's you have to be over prepared in order to have a successful broadcast, and if you don't have it, then well, you know how to prepare next time, and now it's not that dreaded thing of like, okay, I have to search through the media guide, and it's like almost like, all right, well, I'm just gonna read you the media guide verbatim, and just start reading things out. But no, that really is amazing, though, how
and that's
really 4 to 5 hours for you.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, is that I'm still learning every game, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't prepare for anything and everything to happen. So there will be times in games where I'll be like, oh, I really wish that I had that as part of my prep. Well, next game I'm going to have it, and I'm going to add that as part of my preparation process. And also, I would say to young broadcasters, something that's really key too is not getting hung up on if something like that happens and you're not prepared for it, or you make a mistake in your broadcast or something like that. I liken it to how we talk about goaltenders in hockey, where a goalie gives up a bad goal, but that's already happened. He's got to put it behind him and continue to play well for the rest of the game. It's the same as a broadcaster. Hey, I work in radio. I call 82 games a year. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to make them with some regularity because of the amount that I speak. But you can't get hung up on those mistakes, because as much as it might be really sitting in the back of your mind that, oh man, I really screwed that up, the person listening has forgotten about it 5 seconds after it's happened. And you have to be as adaptable and move on from that as well. And I know that's something, when I was in broadcasting school and coming out of broadcasting school and getting into the industry, you'd make a mistake on the air and you would feel like, oh, it's the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be fired after that, or whatever it is. And the fact is that most people that talk on the radio make multiple mistakes per day, as long as you're not cursing or hate speech or racism or anything like that. If you just misspeak or pronounce someone's name wrong or say the wrong name of the player that scored, those are mistakes we all make, even at the highest level. Those are mistakes I make all the time. So you have to be able to move on and be resilient from those sort of things.
Yeah, have a short memory from that. So now we move on here to your time with Vancouver Canucks now. So you get the job. So everyone wants to know here, Brendan, how you got this gig, which, I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. All of the work that you did with Vancouver Giants in the BCHL, it all paid off, and you were noticed by the Canucks. Talk about it. And on top of it, too, if I'm not mistaken, you rooted for them when you were younger.
Yeah, absolutely. I did. I was a Canuck fan growing up. So, it was the job that I had always sort of aspired to, was to call the play-by-play for this team. So I had initially interviewed to do the play-by-play for them in 2014. And at that point, I had only done 2 years of play-by-play. I'd done the 1 year with the Surrey Eagles, and then I had just finished my first year with the Vancouver Giants. And the way it works up here, in a lot of American markets, it's different, but I'm an employee of the radio station, not an employee of the hockey team. So you interview with the radio station. In this case, I also did interviews with the hockey team, just because they want to get to know you and know who you are, and if you're going to be coming in and doing the broadcasts. So the first time I went through that process, I was not chosen, and it was the correct choice, because I was 25, 2 years of play-by-play. I learned a lot from the remaining 3 years of experience I had with the Vancouver Giants. But, from being involved in the Vancouver media realm, I had built a lot of connections. And this is the other thing that I will tell people, and especially if you're aspiring to be a broadcaster, you have to be good, first of all. Like, that's the number one thing. Nobody's going to give you the time of day if you're not good at what you do. But building connections might be equally as important, so that the people that are doing the hiring process don't just know you from listening to your demo. They know you as a person. They know the kind of work you do. They have some sort of connection with you that means that, you stand out above all the other applicants. Because, when the Canucks job came open, the time that I was able to get it. Like, I know for a fact they got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications. And you might be a really good play-by-play broadcaster, but when you're mixed in with a pile of another 150 people, how are you going to stand out? How's someone going to notice you as opposed to, number 147 on the list if you're number 146? So something that was really important to me was, being well known in the Vancouver media landscape, building strong connections and strong relationships and networking. And that actually paid off because in 2017, when I got the job, the radio rights switched. So they had always been on TSN Radio, which was the radio station I had worked for. They switched to a new station and they launched a new all sports station called Sportsnet 650, which is now where I work. And for those that don't understand the sports landscape in Canada, TSN and Sportsnet are the two main competing sports networks. It would be like, I don't know, ESPN versus Fox Sports or something like that. So it was going from one side to the other, and a sports station that hadn't previously existed in Vancouver was being built from the ground up. So I at that point just reached out to a connection I had through the Canucks from having gone through that interview process the first time and said, hey, don't know what's going to be happening here, or if you have any idea whether they're just going to be keeping the guys that are doing the games on and they're going to be switching radio stations, or if there's going to be an opportunity, let me know. And the contact from the Canucks got back to me and said, yep, here's someone that you can get a hold of with Rogers Radio on the Sportsnet side. And so I sent my application immediately. And at that point, the radio station hadn't been built out yet. So I was dealing with like a vice president of radio out in Toronto at that point. But when they got to the point that they hired a program director, the guy they hired is a guy named Craig McEwen. And he is a well-known broadcaster here in Vancouver. He used to be on the TV side for Sportsnet, and I had a really good relationship with him from, being at press conferences and things together, covering for different stations. He worked for Sportsnet TV. I worked for TSN Radio at the time, but I knew him and he knew me. And, he had been laid off a few years earlier and had been struggling to find work, and I had stayed in touch with him. And so he was then chosen as the program director for the radio station, and I immediately reached out to him, and the process went from there to the point where I was hired. Not to say, again, as I go back to, not to say that I only got the job because of the connections I have, because I like to think that I do a good job of broadcasting the games as well, but it is a two-part thing where you've got to be good, but having those connections isn't going to hurt either. And so that was a situation where he knew me, he knew the kind of person I was. He had heard my broadcasts because, they had been on the air on a major radio station in Vancouver with the Vancouver Giants. They were on TSN Radio. So people in the market knew what I sounded like, knew the kind of game I called as well. And so all of those things sort of came together at the perfect time for me to get the job.
Yeah, it's really amazing. So do we have time for one more question, if that's okay, Brendan? All right, cool. I don't want to go over the mark as we discussed earlier. So, which again is absolutely amazing that you have the job now, and now we're heading into the new normal. We spoke about it in the open earlier, but now the game against actually the Islanders against Vancouver on March 10th. This was pre-COVID, just about a day before that the sports world stopped turning, if you will. Did you believe that game was going to be postponed, number one? Number two, did you think once we heard Rudy Gobert down here in the NBA was tested positive, did you think, what was your initial reaction? Did you think about not only your family, but also, that your season was done?
Yeah, well, at that point for that game against the Islanders, we knew that things were starting to develop. At that point, Rudy Gobert hadn't tested positive. So, the scuttlebutt amongst the broadcasters talking in the booth was that, we might not be allowed to travel. We might have to stay and broadcast games from the studio. We might be calling games with no fans in the stands. But that game in itself was a relatively normal game. It was, a relatively full arena, felt like a normal game. The Canucks, I believe, won in a shootout.
Yes.
And then the next day, we flew with the team to Arizona to start a road trip. And so I believe it was the Wednesday, was the day after.
Yes.
We flew to Arizona, landed in Arizona, and at that point, things were starting to develop a little bit. We'd heard at that point that Columbus was going to have to play games in front of empty arenas. And we were speculating, what's going to happen with this game. The Canucks are playing the Coyotes tomorrow night on the Thursday night. Is the game going to happen? Are we even going to have fans in the building, or are we just going to be broadcasting it with an empty arena? And then it was later that night that Rudy Gobert tested positive and the NBA shut down. And at that point, we're all thinking, okay, we'll see what the NHL does here, but it's likely that we're not going to be broadcasting the game tomorrow night. To the point where I decided not to do my prep, because I normally do a bunch of prep the night before, and I was like, you know what? I don't think this is going to happen. I'm not going to do my prep. And then, the next day I would have had time in the afternoon to do my prep had the game been going on. Yeah. But we woke up the next morning, found out morning skates had been canceled. The season was put on pause shortly after that. And then we flew back to Vancouver. And everything sort of just stopped all of a sudden, which was quite strange because generally speaking, working in this industry, things are very busy during the hockey season, and then they're not at all busy during the off season. Mm-hmm. But at least for the most part, you have time to mentally prepare for when that off season's coming. So, the Canucks have not made the playoffs since I've had this job. So I have known that, April 7th or whatever the date is, the season's over, and that's when I'm free. And so that for a few weeks leading up, and you mentally prepare yourself to not have a lot to do and maybe, fix things up around the house or catch up on your to-do list or whatever it might be. This was so strange because we were fully in middle of the season mode. The Canucks were in a hugely important push for a playoff spot, and all of a sudden it just stopped. So I came home. I remember I came home, and at that point we were being advised to do 14-day quarantine because we were returning from outside the country. So my wife and I loaded up on groceries that day, and at that point she was still going to work. So I remember just sitting alone in the house that day being like, well, now what? Yeah. And yeah, things have been very strange ever since. Although it does feel like a new normal. You're right, and lots of downtime to work on other parts of my life, and I've been cooking a lot more and things like that. But all of that said, I'm very excited for hockey to be back, and I'm really looking forward to getting a chance to call these games in the play-in round and potentially further beyond that.
Yeah, I love it. Absolutely. Now, as we are out of time, we've asked every single guest this, and I am going to ask you this one last question. Because we need something to look forward to, because we're told to stay inside. Summer is officially here in North America. So we've asked every single person, actually all 31 guests, you are number 31. So what is your favorite ice cream flavor that you most look forward to having when you're able to, go outside and enjoy the heat?
Yeah, I could tell you a specific one, actually. There's an ice cream place in Penticton, British Columbia, which is more in the interior of the province, called Tickleberries. They have a flavor called cherry custard, which I love. Custard. It's delicious. I would highly recommend it to anyone if you're ever out on the West Coast when people are allowed to travel again.
All right, there we go. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Vancouver Canucks radio play-by-play voice, Brendan Batchelor on Sportsnet 650. Where can we follow you on Twitter and Instagram as well?
At Batch Hockey for both Twitter and Instagram.
There we go. Brendan, thank you so much for joining me here on Hockey Week, presented to you by Blue Line Deli and Bagels. Visit them on Long Island, 719 West Jericho Turnpike, and also BlueLineDeli.com. Also, on Saturday, folks, we will be welcoming in former Edmonton Oiler and New York Islander forward Rob Schremp to the show to conclude Hockey Week as we segue into Phase 3 of the Return to Play format. For Brendan Batchelor, I'm Joey Jarzynka saying so long, and for all of us at the Eastern Observer and the Blackjack Media Networks, we'll see you next time.